So here's the lecture on social media. Um, so with social media, it's kind of like I'm the teacher, but really you guys are the master of this. There's no point in me telling you how to use social media. You do it every day. You've grown up with it, uh, much more so than I have. Um, so what I want to try to do is try to approach it from more of a theoretical look and an ethical look. Because just talking about social media in general, you know as much as I do, um, especially technologically. I operate Facebook for the most part. I have a Twitter account, but I update it very infrequently. I don't have Instagram really. I think I have an account, but I've probably posted to it less than 5 times. Um, I'm approaching this from my perspective, um, with the kind of understanding that you all get this phenomena, but maybe you don't know as much about the theoretical backgrounds of all this. So if we look, I thought maybe a good part was just to look at what makes apps popular theoretically. Now there may have little tweaks and gadgets and things, bells and whistles I call them, within each app that does something unique. Over time, if an app is popular, though, that changes all those bells and whistles. If you look back, I've probably been using Facebook since about 2005, um, and it doesn't look anything today other than the color scheme of blue and white. It doesn't really look anything today like it did when it first started. Those things will change over time. So I'm not trying to really get wrapped up in the little technical features that make apps popular or how they start to be popular, but rather how does any app become popular or start up and be a phenomenon? And theoretically, we can look at Everett Rogers' theory of diffusion of innovations. We talked earlier, I think, in the semester about a diffusion rate, and that just meaning how far a technology has spread. And that diffusion actually comes from Rogers, who was a communication professor, his work on how new ideas or technologies spread and become popular, become ingrained kind of in culture. And he called that the diffusion of innovations. How do you make new things spread? And so he explains diffusion as a process by which an innovation is communicated or spread throughout a social system over time. Because if you think about it, if we're talking about an app like Facebook or Instagram or any of these social media apps, they're started and tons of them are started every year, but only a certain amount of them are going to take off. And that process of trying to get them to take off, of trying to make them popular, that's a process that you as the consumer drives, right? The only reason why Facebook is popular is because someone who was using it communicated about it to someone else, and that kind of social system, that social network started churning and the word started getting out. But there's a whole theory behind that. Who starts communicating about it and when they start communicating about it matters. And so that's what Rogers had done his work on, was trying to figure out what are all the little variables that push this process along. He argues that diffusion, it depends on human capital first. And by human capital, what he means is, what are the resources that the person has, right? How many friends do I have? How close are those relationships? Now, we'll talk about another facet of this called social capital in a minute, but human capital is much more to do about like physical resources. How many friends do you have? Are those friendships, are those firm? or is are the people you encounter, are they just passing friends that you see? I was talking to a buddy today um, about my role in Scouts and his role in Scouts, and we were talking about, and you know this as well, and you operate this day by day. There's guys in there and ladies in there that I've met them through Scouts, and I'm grateful for Scouts because those are good relationships. My best friend right now I've met through Scouts, and we're very alike, and have a lot of fun hanging out together. But there's also people that I've met through Scouts that I talk to them at Scouts, but I would probably not ever invite them over to my house outside of a scouting event. It's not that I dislike them. It's just that relationship is not as firm. It's not as developed and appreciated uh, as much as some of the other relationships. How are all these interconnected, right? So, I mean, yeah, there may be a guy that I'm not that great friends with in Scouts, but maybe we share a person that in common that we're really good friends with. Um, and Rogers is talking about all of this. What types of relationships are connected, and how are they connected? And the thing that's important to think about this is that not just talking about how does technology spread or how does a new concept spread, but a lot of this stuff is also um, it's applicable to the messages that you post and how you treat an app and try to spread word of mouth uh, on that app. That relies on human capital as well as social capital. And I'll talk about social capital next. But human capital, can not just be how many friends do you have, how firm are those relationships, how are they interconnected. This is looking at the physical side of it, not necessarily the social side of it. But another thing of human capital, another aspect, could be money, economics. How much money do you have? Because, people that have more money tend to make more of an impression on others. Whether it's a good impression or a bad impression, everybody now knows, or not knows, but is aware of who Coach Joe Moorhead is. He's our new football coach, right? Well, he's a very well-known person in the community now. He also happens to probably have a lot of cash. Somebody the other day was telling me that he had bought a house in their neighborhood, and they were talking about how much money that house cost and whatnot. So sometimes social status and economics are related, and that's part of human capital. How much money do you have? And that's important because people who have more money and have liquid funds, in other words, they can move money around quickly, they have extra money, those are the people that can risk spending that money on things that may not pan out later, right? So if there's a new app that you're thinking about getting, but it's a $20 app, and you don't want to commit to it, well, a person who makes millions of dollars can probably buy that app without batting an eye. But the less kind of capital that you have, the less likely you are, or the less possible you are to purchase that thing, to make those risky decisions. So social capital is a part of human capital. It's like a subset. So it is talking about relationships and social relationships in particular. A definition of social capital is the networks of relationships among people who live and work in a particular society, enabling that society to function effectively. So it's not just looking at your relationships with other people. Social capital is also looking at your role in those relationships. We all have relationships that we feel are one-sided, as opposed to other relationships that we think are very good give and take. And social capital is also going to think about that and put that into play. So you have all these relationships where Are they healthy relationships? Or, we already said, are they firm relationships? Um, are they developed? And how is that interconnected? How are the relationships that you have, let's say at church, connected to the relationships you have at school as a student? How are the connections and relationships you've made through a boyfriend or girlfriend, how are those related to other relationships that you have? So everyone wears these different hats, right? You're wearing a hat of a student, wearing the hat of um, a, a church member, wearing a hat of the leader in your sorority. And how are these things, how are these roles all interconnected? We all have different degrees of these levels of capital, human capital, how much resources we have, social capital, the nature of our relationships. We even have things like cultural capital, which is, how in the know is someone about how the current culture is going. We in the 60s, hippies talked about those people who were square, right? Or those people who were hip. I think, I know I sound like old white guy here, but, I think the terminology now is woke, being woke, right? Well, I mean, being woke is a form of cultural capital. Do you know what's going on? Do you realize the culture around you? There are most definitely people in the world right now who are not culturally woke, who don't understand how things are going. They don't understand the current state of music, the current state of television, the current state of activism, current fashion. They're not in line with knowing about those things. But there are other people who are trendsetters, and cultural trendsetters. Um, I can remember, it just brings up an interesting story. I can remember going to like the first big party that I went to ever as a teenager. Not talking about little kid birthday parties, but like going to the dance. Someone's having a dance and you're going, and there's going to be a whole bunch of people that are popular. Um, and I can remember going there. It was the first time I ever heard the Beastie Boys, and it was the Beastie Boys' first album. And I walked in, and there's 4 or 5 guys that are just dancing like crazy to Brass Monkey by the Beastie Boys. And I had never heard that song, and I'm 12 or 13 at the time. And I hear that song, and I look at the guys dancing, and I'm just like, man, these guys, they know what's going on. This is hip stuff. I like this stuff. I like the Beastie Boys, but I never knew they existed before. And, those will also be the guys that were the first to wear the new fashions and trends and all that. Those people have cultural capital, right? They kind of know the pulse of where things are. Political capital is important too. You got to know how to move an idea through the political hurdles that you're going to encounter. How do you get an idea, a concept, an issue? How do you get that successfully navigated through all the red tape, all the politics and bureaucracy? How do you get that pushed through so that action is taken on it, right? So if we look at what Rogers did in terms of his theory, is he was able to break people down into these categories. He called them categories of adopters or adopter categories. And we can take a look in class at the little bell curve that he created for these people. And as you can imagine, with like a bell curve, the extremes, the percentage of people in those extremes are less than the middle. And it works real well with what he's called these categories. The first are innovators. Innovators are people that take risks. They have high social status, so usually people are paying attention to what they do. And they can take those risks because they can economically absorb failures. So usually these are people, innovators are people that are seen by a lot of people, have disposable income. If you think about an innovator, Think about Elon Musk right now. Definitely an innovator. What does he do? Well, he builds cars that run purely off electricity. It's not a hybrid, it's an electric vehicle. And not only that, but he makes high performance vehicles. So they're not little golf carts that tinker around, they're sports cars, right? Elon Musk has tons of money. If something bombs, he can absorb that failure. SpaceX is his project as well. Trying to figure out the cheapest, most economical, but most reliable and efficient way to travel in space. Well, how many of those rockets blew up before he could successfully fly one out to space and land it back successfully so that it could be used again? He can absorb those failures because he has the money to do it. And because he has the money to do it, he can take those risks. And when he's successful, everyone's looking at him and everyone sees. And so, I think, what was it? They had made a flamethrower, and Elon Musk's group did. And people online were just buying these flamethrowers because they just thought, oh, this is cool. It's not that expensive, and you just walk around with a flamethrower. Now, why you needed it, I don't know. But his social status was so high that once he put that out there, that he had designed this thing and people could buy it, people started buying it. You have early adopters is the category that is kind of not as aggressive as innovators, but early adopters. They have the highest degree of opinion leadership. So what does that mean? Well, Elon Musk, yes, he has high social status. He is known for taking risks, and he is known for being able to absorb those failures. So when people think about, this new idea, hey, flamethrowers for everybody, people can look at Elon Musk and they can go, well, yeah, he created a flamethrower. He kind of does things off the cuff. He wings it a lot. He does these crazy things. So people look to him for leadership, but not necessarily opinion leadership, right? If he tells you something, okay, that sounds great, but can you deliver? If a person is an innovator, they've had failures. And so people may be reluctant to say, let's follow that person, because sometimes the things they do fail. Early adopters tend to be more grounded, more consistent, more level-headed. So, yes, they will adopt a new technology early in its lifespan, but they've usually made a very judicious choice. In other words, they've thought through their reasoning. And for that reason, people kind of see them as opinion leaders. Oh, if so-and-so has bought this, they've done their homework on it, and it must be okay. I'm kind of an early adopter, especially in my family. If my sister wants something, she'll call me up and say, would you get this? And that's an early adopter mentality. She knows me as someone like that. She knows she knows that I'm kind of a penny pincher too. So she wouldn't regard me necessarily as an innovator, because I'm not going to buy something just to buy it outright early on. But you can be an early adopter, and seen as someone who makes judicious choices, and can shape the opinions of other people and bring them around to adopt the product. Then you have the early majority. The early majority is when everyone kind of buys in together at the upstart of it. So in terms of like Facebook, what we're thinking is you have this elite group of students who start using it. They convince another network of their friends to start using it, and then it kind of blows up. Early majority, I guess, is another term for going viral. It's when something starts being adopted by the masses. but it's on the early side of that adoption, not on the later end of it. And these people who tend to be early majority adopters, they typically have above average social status. In other words, I would say they're normal or average, but they're just a little bit above that. A lot of this has to do with keeping up with the Joneses. Oh, so-and-so family has a Roomba. That was just a wild example, but so-and-so has a Roomba. We should get a Roomba too, right? And so they buy a Roomba. And then more and more people buy a Roomba. So as someone in the early majority, you're trying to keep up with what other people are doing. But that tends to mean that you're low on opinion leadership. Like, you're not going to change other people's opinion as much as you're reacting to having your own opinion changed. Then you have late majority. These are people that adopt late in the game. They may have been skeptical about something, So if you look at me and how I don't use Instagram, it could be that I'm approaching this from the standpoint of, I just don't know if it's for me. I don't really see a need for it. I've already got Facebook. I've got Twitter. Why do I need a third option in social media? Part of that also is low social status. If I was a rock star, a movie star, someone who was constantly in the public eye, I probably would be an early majority, maybe even an early adopter of a social media app. But in terms of Instagram, I have low social status, right? Not a lot of people are looking at me. And not a lot of people, just in general, look to me in terms of social media. Oh my God, did Kevin create an account on here yet? Did he create an account on there yet? People don't care about what social media I'm using. So I tend to be a lower social status in that regard. But tech geeky things, I'm usually an early adopter. I like to test out new technology. And then you have your laggards who, they're your grandparents, for lack of a better explanation. They're going to be the last to adopt. They have little to no opinion leadership on that topic. No one's going to listen to my mom about her using Facebook and have her convince the person that they need to use it also. She's not an opinion leader in terms of technology. Usually with a laggard, there's an aversion to change. Well, why do I need that? I don't need that. That's just something extra for me to do, something extra for me to learn, and I don't want to learn it. I'm happy where I am right now. Why adopt that technology? And so these are your categories of people. So change things over from looking at diffusion of innovations and what makes things popular, going back to journalism and back to the same question. Looking at the relationship now as journalism has evolved and we've entered an age in which journalism and social media are tied so tightly together, right? If you don't believe that, then you weren't paying attention to Zuckerberg being brought in front of Congress, because that's exactly what that issue is about. Is Facebook a journalism platform? If so, was it manipulated? And Russians used it to put out true fake news and fake stories, gather information on people so that they could cater stories to them. It's kind of a perfect culmination of what Facebook was trying to do to begin with. The unfortunate thing is they succeeded. Facebook a while back, a number of years ago, decided that it did want to get into the business of telling news stories. And so what was happening was they decided we can write an algorithm. And just like the computer analyzing what products people are talking about on Facebook, and we can then cater an ad to them on that, we can analyze the content of their posts and try to guess politically where they are on a spectrum, and cater news stories to that, right? So, and what that leads to is a lot of not necessarily fake news, but news that isn't necessarily relevant. Facebook was very good at that. It succeeded. But then you started having foreign actors that came in and said, okay, well, if we can find these people and we can cater things to them, let's cater things to them in a way that gets them politically aligned where we want them to be. So we're not necessarily selling a product to them as much as we are selling a candidate. So Facebook has a question to answer now. Are they a media site, or are they just data collectors, data curators? You know, when you post to Facebook, you're making a statement that is going to be about a period in time. You know, today I posted something about how the Stormy Daniels sketch, there's a sketch artist that drew a picture of the guy that Stormy Daniels says is the guy that threatened her. So the sketch came out, and the more I looked at it, I was like, man, that looks just like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And so I posted on Facebook a side-by-side picture of the two. And I said, you know, I'm just saying, could be this guy. Well, you know, that's a statement that I'm just making. It's a joke, right? It's a statement I'm making, and but it is a snapshot of a period of time. 10 years from now, people look back on that and go, why was that funny? Or why was that even important? Or what does that even mean? But Facebook is collecting that and holding that, right? It's like a huge museum of public thought. So what is Facebook's role? Are they a media site, a journalism site? Or, for the lack of a better term, are they a historical archivist? Are they archiving things that are happening in history? They have to figure that out. There's definitions of journalism, which we've talked about. And one day in class I asked you, define what journalism is, define who a journalist is. Some of the newer social media owners and writers and reporters, they'll come up with a definition like this one: journalism happens when someone tells a compelling true story. But if you think about it, you know, telling a compelling true story, anybody can do that. I can tell you a funny story that actually happened to me, you know, a few weeks ago. And you can listen to it and find it entertaining. Now, it could be totally true, but does that make it really journalism? Does that capture all of what journalism is? And because I'm a Star Wars geek, I just thought about this. You know, this is the moment in Star Wars where Luke tries to find out what happened to his father. And he asks Obi-Wan, you know, how did my father die? And Ben Kenobi comes up with this, a young Jedi named Darth Vader, who's a pupil, blah, blah, blah. He turned to the dark side. He killed your father, right? And then he killed all the other Jedi. And is that a compelling story? Yeah. It's a story about how this dude's dad died. And the fact that after he killed his dad, then he went out and killed everybody else. Is it a true story? Well, as we come to find out later on in the movies, truth kind of depends on the person who's telling it. You know, the kind of statement in Return of the Jedi that Obi-Wan makes to Luke is, you know, what I told you was true, just from a certain point of view, right? So truth depends on the person telling the story, and truth alone may not be sufficient in making good journalism, or for making good social media posts, for that matter of fact. Just because you can say something truthfully doesn't necessarily mean you need to say it, or you should say it, right? There's a lot of stuff that could be true, but maybe is something you don't need to put out on social media. There's a lot of things that these news sites can say on Facebook or on Twitter, these reporters can say that may be true, but isn't necessarily good journalism. Here's some other truths that Obi-Wan could have said. How did my father die? Well, he wasn't very good at playing the floor as lava. This was your father's lightsaber. By the way, he murdered 30 kids with it. Or Obi-Wan is saying, are you Obi-Wan Kenobi? And he says, now that's a name I haven't heard since. And instead of finishing that sentence, he says, since I threw your dad into a volcano and cut off his legs. So are those true statements? Yes. Yeah. Is that really the best thing that Obi-Wan could have said to Luke at the time? No. And so you need to think about that too. That's part of good journalism. That's part of a good social media post. Telling the truth just simply sometimes isn't the most ethical, responsible thing to do. You certainly don't want to tell a lie, but you want to tell the truth, but in proper context, right? If I look at how some traditional journalists have tried to define journalism in today's age with social media, they have a much more revised definition. And actually, one of the guys who came up with this definition is the current dean of the journalism school where I went to. He wasn't there when I was there, but he's the current dean there. And he writes an introductory journalism textbook. And he, along with this female professor, they sat and they wrote this book up, and they tried to come up with this definition in which they say journalism is something that informs, analyzes, interprets, and explains, right? So it does tell you the truth, but it also analyzes that truth. It interprets it for readers, and it explains what that is. Journalism also investigates. It doesn't just spit out a fact to you. It looks through things. It tries to figure things out that it doesn't fully know. So if it's presented with something and it wants to know more about that, or it wants to feel like it is responsibly informing you, it will investigate itself. It will go out and find the answers. Good journalism creates public conversation. It gets people talking, right? It's not here's what did Jim have for breakfast this morning? Well, no one cares, right? Good journalism should create public conversation. It should be a forum through which we can discuss and have a dialogue. It should help generate social empathy. Now, people have problems with this. Is it the job of a journalist to try to sway someone's feelings? Well, if you go back to the founding fathers and you think about why they put such a high standard on freedom of speech, why they put such a high standard on the right of a free press, it wasn't just so that people could know stuff. It's so that people could know stuff and react in a responsible way, right? So that if someone saw an injustice or heard about an injustice through the press, they could work to fix that injustice, right? So this past weekend, 60 Minutes had an excellent piece on, I think the company is called Allegiant. It's an airline, and they have had horrible accidents, right? So they've had a lot of crashes. They've had accidents. Their maintenance records are shoddy. And apparently the FAA just kind of looked the other way, right? Well, so 60 Minutes in reporting that story, they can just tell you this stuff happened, right? And they can just say, well, here's another crash that happened, and here's how the FAA responded. That's not the point of why they do a 20 to 25 minute story on that topic, though. The point of a news magazine like that, a broadcast news magazine, in other words, long form storytelling, long form reporting, is so that something happens as a result, so that society reacts and demands more. That's the point of what good journalism should do. It should tell you something's broken, we need to fix it. And it gives you the information that you need so that you can move forward in trying to figure out how to fix it. And that's what's meant by generating social empathy. The other thing is that good journalism should encourage accountability. So a good journalist should be accountable for the things that they say. And they should have to respond and react when they're caught being inaccurate. If they're lying, if they're not telling the whole truth, not telling the whole story, people should call them out and make them accountable. And a good journalist will encourage other journalists to do the same thing. And a good journalist will encourage an audience to hold other reporters accountable. If you're reporting on facts and it turns out your facts are wrong, that's what you deal in as a journalist. That's the currency of your trade, is accountable facts. And if it turns out that you're using phony things, you are screwing up the very heart of the job. So what's my point? And this is the last slide. Social media is about connecting with people. Yes. It's about sharing your stories. Yes. So why do I say that? Because if you looked at what Zuckerberg was saying in his testimony before Congress, those are the two things that he kept talking about. People would ask him, is Facebook a media site or is it an archivist? What is it doing? And Zuckerberg always says, well, our job at Facebook is to connect people and help them share their stories. You know, help people connect and share. Okay. But also, when you go to social media and you do that, when you go to Facebook and join up and start this social network, yes, you're going there so you can connect. You can go there so you can share. But you need to be credible. And if you make wild claims about anything in social posts, and this is just kind of like a good ethics point here, be credible. Be accountable. If you screw up online, tell people you screwed up online. Tell people you're sorry. Right now what we're looking at is Starbucks. So I was hearing this story this morning. Starbucks is being protested right now. Why? Because I think it was in Philadelphia. 2 black men came in, asked to use the bathroom, but they hadn't bought anything. And I think the Starbucks, and you can correct me in class if I'm wrong about the story, I think Starbucks called the cops on them. When they didn't use the restroom, they were also waiting for a friend. And so they just sat down at the tables and waited for this friend. Now, that's no different than how any of us have ever said, well, just meet me at McDonald's. And we don't have to eat at McDonald's, but just meet me there because it's a known place, right? It's an easy place to find. So these gentlemen were doing the same exact thing, except Starbucks responded by thinking, oh, these guys are up to no good. They're loitering. We don't want this here. And they have them arrested. The cops come and arrest them. So what does Starbucks do? Starbucks apologizes right off the bat, says they're sorry. The CEO of Starbucks contacts the guys that were arrested and says, please come sit down with me, let's have a talk. And in which he says in that talk, and these gentlemen say the same thing, the CEO says, we were wrong and we're sorry and we want to do whatever it takes to make it better because this is not who we want to be. And so this morning what they were saying is that, I forget what day it is, but Starbucks is going to close down for a day. All 8,000 stores that it owns in America are going to close for one day. And on that day there's supposed to be anti-racism training. And the word of that story, the news of that story has gotten out. And I was hearing someone, be it on CNN or MSNBC or CBS this morning, or some morning show I was watching, the person that was on the desk there said, "Isn't this great that we finally find a company in America that gets it right, that does something wrong and doesn't try to sugarcoat it or gloss over it, but they immediately say, yep, we did it and it was wrong, and here's what we want to do to try to fix it." And so these people on this news story today, this news show, they were praising Starbucks, not necessarily for doing what it did, but in responding, how it responded, and how it took full accountability for it. So be credible, be accountable in whatever you post. Your posts don't have to be journalism. Your posts, maybe you're just telling jokes. Maybe you're just putting a picture up of the sketch artist and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Maybe you're just telling jokes. And that's fine, be funny. But remember, if you're not credible, if you're not accountable, you can try to be as funny as you want. Some people are still going to tend to think you're a jackass. And that's why I put LeVar Ball's picture up there. Here's a guy who screams to high heaven about how great his kids are in basketball and how they're better than anybody else ever in basketball. And when he's proven true, or proven false rather, he just ignores the criticism. He ignores what anybody says to him, and he makes up these claims that just aren't credible. Well, and he's trying to sell a brand right now, big baller brand, shoes and clothes and all that. No one views this guy as credible. No one views this guy as being worthy of listening to. If they do listen to him, it's just to hear the crazy stuff he says. But that'll burn out. That'll run through. People will have enough of the craziness, and they'll just start disregarding him. And whatever focus or spotlight he has right now, that'll be gone soon. It can't sustain itself forever. People will get tired of that. People would rather be connected to credible, accountable people online. So that is the end of the lecture. I will see you all in class. Thank you for your time.